Ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying my videos, please click the like button. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. In the heart of the Siberian taiga, tensions were running high within the small hiking group. Denis, a seasoned adventurer with a rugged background, was struggling to contain his mounting irritation and anger towards Tonka, a young blogger from Moscow. To Denis, Tonka epitomized everything that was wrong with the modern, urbanized world. Her presence in the harsh, unforgiving wilderness seemed not only out of place but almost offensive to him. Denis had grown up in Siberia, where survival skills were second nature, honed through years of navigating treacherous landscapes and enduring severe climates. His recent move to the capital had already been a cultural shock, but finding himself in the remote taiga with Tonka, who he deemed woefully unprepared, was almost too much to bear. Tonka, on the other hand, had built her following by documenting her experiences in nature. However, her definition of nature had largely been limited to well-trodden paths, scenic picnics, and charming campsites within a short drive from the city. The reality of the taiga, with its dense, unyielding forests and the ever-present threat of danger, was far beyond anything she had encountered before. From the moment they set off, Denis was acutely aware of Tonka's inadequacies. She struggled with her gear, stumbled over roots and rocks, and complained incessantly about the physical toll of their journey. Each of her missteps and complaints felt like a personal affront to Denis. He saw her as a symbol of the privileged, superficial world he had left behind, where comfort and convenience were taken for granted. Their interactions were fraught with conflict. Denis's patience was thin, and he often snapped at Tonka, his tone harsh and unforgiving. He couldn't understand why Elia, his friend from the city who had suggested this trip, thought it was a good idea to bring her along. Ilya had explained that having Tonka on board could boost the visibility of Denis's own blog about wilderness survival, but Denis found it hard to see past the immediate inconvenience and danger she represented. The situation reached a boiling point one afternoon when Tonka attempted to film a segment for her blog. They had come across an old, abandoned cabin deep in the forest, a relic that seemed to belong more to ghost stories than reality. The sight of the decaying structure, with its eerie remnants of past inhabitants and unsettling silence, had put Denis on edge. When Tonka pulled out her camera and started cheerfully narrating the scene, Denis lost his temper. "Put that thing away," he barked, his voice echoing through the trees. "This isn't a joke or a movie set. You have no idea what you're dealing with out here." Tonka froze, clearly startled by the intensity of his reaction. She looked at Ilya for support, but he could only shrug apologetically. Denis's outburst had silenced even the forest, and the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. "You think you can just waltz in here and play adventurer?" Denis continued, his frustration spilling over. "This place demands respect. It's not your playground." The harshness of his tone brought tears to Tonka's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away, not wanting to show weakness. She lowered her camera, but her defiant expression remained. Denis turned away, running a hand through his hair in exasperation. He knew his anger wasn't just about Tonka, it was about everything she represented and the threat he felt to his way of life. But in that moment, he couldn't see a way to bridge the gap between them. As they stood there in tense silence, the disparity between their worlds seemed insurmountable. For Denis, the taiga was a living entity, one that required deep understanding and humility. For Tonka, it was content, a backdrop for her online persona. Reconciling these two perspectives would be no easy feat, and the journey ahead promised to test not only their endurance but their ability to coexist in such starkly contrasting realities. Tonka had always considered herself an outdoor enthusiast. Her social media followers adored her picturesque posts of gentle hikes through well-marked trails, serene lakeside picnics, and cozy campfire evenings. Her experience with nature, however, was a far cry from the grueling reality of the Siberian taiga. When she agreed to join this expedition, she hadn't fully grasped what it entailed. She had envisioned another adventure she could easily document for her channel, not realizing the profound difference between a casual nature outing and a relentless trek through uncharted wilderness. From the very start, her unpreparedness became evident. Her designer hiking boots, perfect for Instagram shots but impractical for the harsh terrain, offered little support against the rough, uneven ground. She lagged behind the group, struggling with her equipment and constantly needing breaks. The weight of her backpack, filled with camera gear and personal comforts, seemed to drag her down with every step. Her frequent stops to film and take selfies only exacerbated the delays and frustrations. Dennis, used to the silent language of the forest and the rigorous demands of true wilderness survival, found her behavior baffling and irritating. Each of Tonka's complaints about the physical strain, the insects, and the lack of amenities grated on his nerves. He couldn't fathom how someone could enter such a formidable environment with so little respect or preparation. The constant disputes about pace and priorities added strain to the group dynamics, making every step forward a trial of patience and endurance. Dennis's resentment towards Tonka was deeper than mere annoyance. Having recently relocated from the vast, rugged expanses of Siberia to the bustling urban sprawl of the capital, Dennis felt like a fish out of water. The move had been necessary for personal reasons, but he hadn't fully adapted to the fast-paced, often superficial city life. In Tonka, he saw a personification of everything he found challenging about the city: privilege, superficiality, and a seeming detachment from the raw, unvarnished realities of life. Tonka, with her polished persona and successful blog, seemed to glide through life on a wave of likes and subscriptions. Her ability to monetize her adventures and turn every experience into curated content clashed with Dennis's deeply ingrained values of authenticity and hard-earned wisdom. To him, her presence in the taiga was an intrusion, a disruption of the sacred, unspoken contract between man and nature. She was not just unprepared, she was, in his eyes, undeserving of the wilderness's brutal beauty. The divide between them was stark. Tonka's background, filled with opportunities and comfort, contrasted sharply with Dennis's rugged upbringing in the remote corners of Siberia. He had learned to respect and fear the wilderness, understanding its power and unpredictability. Tonka, on the other hand, approached it with a carefree confidence that seemed naive and reckless to Dennis. Her success and popularity, achieved through a medium he viewed as shallow, only fueled his disdain. Their interactions were marked by this underlying tension. Dennis couldn't hide his contempt, and Tonka's attempts to bridge the gap often fell flat. She didn't understand his silent reverence for the forest, and he couldn't see past her glossy exterior to the person beneath. Each misstep she made seemed to validate his low opinion of her, reinforcing the social and emotional chasm between them. The group's dynamics suffered as a result. Ilya, who had invited Tonka in hopes of increasing the visibility of Dennis's blog, found himself constantly mediating between the two. The ongoing disputes over trivial matters like where to set up camp or how long to rest were exhausting. The strain was palpable, and it became clear that their differing perspectives on what this journey represented were a significant source of conflict and discomfort for everyone involved. In this harsh and unforgiving environment, the clash of their worlds became a microcosm of larger societal divides. The wilderness, indifferent to their struggles, continued to demand resilience and unity. Whether or not they could overcome their differences and learn to coexist in the face of such formidable challenges remained to be seen. Despite the mounting tensions and frequent disagreements, Ilya tried his best to be the peacemaker. He was Dennis's friend from the city, someone who understood both the ruggedness of Dennis's background and the more polished, urban life Tonka represented. He had a foot in both worlds, and this made him the ideal bridge between the two conflicting personalities. One morning, noticing Tonka struggling with her feet, Ilya decided to step in. Her fashionable yet impractical boots were causing her significant discomfort, making every step through the dense underbrush and uneven terrain a painful ordeal. Ilya, who had packed several practical items for the trip, remembered he had an extra pair of insoles that could provide some much-needed relief. "Tonka," he said gently, catching her attention as they took a brief rest, "I noticed you're having a tough time with your boots. Here, try these insoles. They should make things a bit more bearable." Tonka looked up, surprised and grateful. She had been too proud to ask for help directly, but the pain in her feet was becoming unbearable. "Thank you, Ilya," she said, her voice tinged with relief. She quickly swapped out the flimsy insoles that came with her boots for the more supportive ones Ilya offered. Ilya's gesture was a small act of kindness, but it highlighted the importance of empathy and support in such a challenging environment. It also served as a reminder that despite their differences, they were all in this together, facing the same obstacles and striving towards the same goal. The group's journey into the heart of the taiga was not aimless. They had a specific destination in mind: the hermit Ambrosi. Ambrosi was a man of legend, living in seclusion deep within the forest, dedicating his life to prayer and ascetic practices. His lifestyle was a testament to human endurance and the spiritual quest for enlightenment, removed from the comforts and distractions of modern society. Dinas had heard stories about Ambrosi's solitary existence and his near-mythical presence in the taiga. Meeting him was not only an opportunity to encounter a living embodiment of resilience and spiritual dedication, but also a chance to gain insight into a way of life that few dared to pursue. The idea to include Tanka in this expedition was Ilya's brainchild. He believed that her participation could bring valuable exposure to Dinas's budding blog about wilderness adventures. With Tanka's substantial following, their journey could reach a wider audience, inspiring others to appreciate the raw beauty and unforgiving nature of the Siberian wilderness. "I think having Tanka with us could really boost your blog," Ilya had explained to Dinas before they set out. Her followers are always looking for unique content, and what's more unique than a journey to find a reclusive hermit in the taiga? Plus, it might help people see a different side of her, one that's not just about city life and curated experiences. Dinas had been skeptical but agreed, hoping that the potential benefits would outweigh the inevitable complications. Now, as they trekked deeper into the forest, he found himself questioning that decision. The presence of a camera and a social media persona seemed at odds with the serene, contemplative nature of their quest. Yet he couldn't deny that if they managed to document their encounter with Ambrosi, it could indeed make for compelling content. The journey was arduous, marked by dense forests, treacherous terrain, and the constant battle against fatigue and the elements. Each step brought them closer to their elusive goal, and each challenge they faced tested their resolve and unity. Despite the friction between Dinas and Tanka, the group pushed forward, driven by the promise of meeting Ambrosi and the hope that their efforts would pay off in ways they couldn't yet fully anticipate. As they ventured further into the depths of the taiga, the legend of Ambrosi loomed larger in their minds. The forest around them seemed to grow denser and more foreboding, as if guarding the secrets of the hermit's reclusive life. They knew that finding him would not be easy, but the potential rewards, both spiritual and practical, kept them moving, one difficult step at a time. Deep in the heart of the dense, untouched taiga, Dinas, Ilya, and Tanya stumbled upon an unexpected and eerie discovery. They had been trekking for hours, the dense canopy overhead filtering the sunlight into a dim, greenish glow. The undergrowth was thick, and the air was heavy with the earthy scent of moss and pine needles. As they pushed through the last of the thick brush, they found themselves in a small clearing. There, in the center, stood an old, dilapidated cabin. Its weathered wooden walls were darkened with age and neglect, and the roof sagged precariously under the weight of years of accumulated debris. It was a sight that sent a shiver down their spines. Cautiously, they approached the cabin, the air around them seeming to grow colder with each step. The windows were shattered, their glass panes missing, leaving only jagged remnants. The door, hanging loosely on one hinge, creaked ominously as they pushed it open. Inside, the sight that greeted them was one of horror and revulsion. Scattered across the floor were the skeletal remains of various animals, their bones bleached white and brittle. The remains of a fire pit in the center of the room suggested that someone had once sought warmth here, but the blackened, charred timbers indicated that a blaze had once raged uncontrollably within these walls. The air inside was thick with the acrid smell of soot and decay. They could see old, rusted metal traps, some still with the remnants of the unfortunate creatures that had been caught in them. The walls were marked with deep gouges, as if some desperate animal had tried to claw its way out. Dinas felt a wave of nausea wash over him, while Tanya covered her mouth in shock, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disgust. Ilya, trying to maintain a semblance of composure, stepped further into the cabin, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. "Who could have lived here?" Tanya whispered, her voice barely audible over the oppressive silence. "I don't know," Ilya replied, his voice tense. "But whatever happened here, it wasn't good." As they explored further, they found more signs of the cabin's grim history. Old, tattered pieces of clothing hung from rusty nails, and a broken, grimy mirror reflected their uneasy faces back at them. There were old tools, covered in rust and dust, hinting at the hard, solitary life of whoever had once called this place home. The discovery left them with an unsettling feeling, a deep sense of unease that clung to them as they backed out of the cabin and into the relative safety of the forest. The taiga, with its endless expanse of trees and undergrowth, suddenly felt less like a wilderness adventure and more like a place of hidden dangers and dark secrets. As they made their way back to their campsite, the image of the abandoned cabin lingered in their minds, a stark reminder of the mysteries and perils that lay hidden in the depths of the taiga. Denis, Ilya, and Tanya had been hiking through the dense Siberian taiga for days when they stumbled upon an eerie sight. Hidden among the ancient trees and thick underbrush was a decrepit wooden cabin, its walls blackened by fire and its roof sagging under the weight of years. The discovery sent a shiver down their spines. The cabin exuded an aura of malevolence, as if the forest itself was warning them to stay away. "Wow, this place is creepy," Tanya whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. She pulled out her camera, eager to document their find. This will make for an amazing shot. As she adjusted the lens, Denis stepped in front of her, his face set in a stern expression. "No, Tanya, put the camera away." "What?" Why, Tanya retorted, frustration creeping into her voice. "This is incredible. We have to capture it." Denis shook his head vehemently. "It's not safe. Look at this place. It's a disaster waiting to happen. There could be wild animals, or who knows what else inside." Ilya, standing a few feet away, remained silent, his eyes darting between his two friends. The tension between Denis and Tanya was palpable, a familiar conflict that seemed to flare up at the worst possible times. Tanya lowered her camera, her cheeks flushed with anger. "You always do this, Denis. You always try to control everything. We're here to document our journey, and this is part of it." Denis took a deep breath, trying to keep his own temper in check. "I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to keep us safe. Look inside." Reluctantly, Tanya turned her gaze towards the interior of the cabin. The dim light revealed a scene straight out of a nightmare. Animal bones, charred and broken, littered the floor. The stench of decay mingled with the acrid smell of burnt wood, making her stomach churn. "Oh my God," she muttered, her earlier determination fading into horror. "What happened here?" Denis softened, his voice low but firm. "I don't know, but it's not something we should mess with. Let's get what we need and leave. Quickly." Tanya nodded, swallowing her pride along with her fear. As she packed her camera away, Denis gave her a reassuring look. "We'll find something else, something safer to document." The trio moved cautiously around the cabin, gathering what information they could without stepping inside. The shadows seemed to stretch towards them, as if eager to tell their dark stories. But Denis was right. Some stories were best left untold, and some places best left forgotten. As they made their way back into the safety of the forest, the tension between Denis and Tanya eased, replaced by a shared sense of unease about what they had discovered. The abandoned cabin in the taiga would haunt their dreams for nights to come, a grim reminder of the dangers lurking in the wilderness. As they cautiously stepped inside the decrepit cabin, the group's initial sense of dread intensified. The interior was a chaotic blend of bizarre and unsettling details, each more disturbing than the last. Tanya, Denis, and Ilya exchanged uneasy glances, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The first thing they noticed was the pervasive pinkish slime that clung to the surfaces. It dripped from the ceiling beams and oozed down the walls, giving the entire place a sickly, unnatural sheen. Tanya hesitantly reached out to touch it but quickly recoiled, wiping her fingers on her pants in disgust. "What the hell is this stuff?" she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Denis shook his head, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I've never seen anything like it. It's almost organic." Their attention was then drawn to the floor, where the remains of various animals lay scattered. The bones were stark white, disturbingly clean and neatly piled, as if arranged by some unseen hand. The contrast between the pristine bones and the decayed surroundings was jarring, adding to the surreal atmosphere of the cabin. Ilya crouched down to examine them more closely. These bones, they're too clean. It's like they've been bleached. Denis nodded, his unease growing. And look at the tracks. These are fresh, he pointed to the ground, where imprints of small, clawed feet crisscrossed the dirt floor, leading in and out of the cabin. Tanya shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. What could have done this, and why? As they ventured further in, they noticed the walls covered in a fine layer of black soot. It was as if the cabin had been scorched in a fire long ago, yet the soot remained fragile and dry, flaking off at the slightest touch. Denis brushed his hand against one of the beams, and a cascade of black particles fell to the ground. It's like the fire happened yesterday, he said, wiping his hands on his jacket. But this place feels ancient. The group moved in silence, their senses on high alert. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside seemed amplified in the oppressive stillness of the cabin. The combination of the pink slime, the clean bones, the fresh animal tracks, and the delicate soot created an atmosphere thick with mystery and danger. Ilya, usually the calmest of the group, voiced what they were all thinking. We need to be careful. Whatever happened here, it's not something we want to get involved with. Denis nodded in agreement. Let's document what we can and get out. Quickly. Tanya, still clutching her camera, began snapping pictures, her hands shaking slightly. The sense of impending doom was overwhelming, as if the cabin itself was a living entity, watching them, waiting. As they finally stepped back into the daylight, the tension in the air seemed to lift, but the haunting images of the cabin's interior lingered in their minds. They knew they had stumbled upon something far beyond their understanding, something that would stay with them long after they left the taiga. After the unsettling experience in the cabin, the group pressed on through the dense forest, their nerves still on edge. The air seemed heavier, the forest quieter, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, watching the trio navigate the increasingly treacherous path. Denis took the lead, his eyes scanning the trail ahead for any signs of danger. Ilya followed closely, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a focused determination. Tanya brought up the rear, her camera capturing the rugged beauty of the taiga, despite the lingering sense of unease. She spoke softly into the camera, her voice a mix of forced cheerfulness and genuine fascination. We're moving deeper into the forest now, she said, stepping carefully over a gnarled root. The path is getting tougher, but the scenery is absolutely stunning. Just look at these ancient trees. The trail grew narrower, choked with underbrush and fallen branches. The ground was uneven, a mix of loose stones and treacherous roots that threatened to trip them at every step. Denis paused occasionally to check their bearings, his compass a small but vital lifeline in the sprawling wilderness. Watch your step, he called back to the others. The ground's pretty unstable here. Tanya kept her camera rolling, determined to maintain a positive outlook despite the challenges. She captured footage of vibrant fungi growing on decaying logs, the sunlight filtering through the dense canopy, and the occasional wildlife that darted across their path. Her commentary remained upbeat, a stark contrast to the tension that still lingered from their encounter at the cabin. We're seeing some incredible wildlife out here, she narrated, focusing her lens on a squirrel scurrying up a tree. It's amazing how life thrives in every corner of this forest. As the hours passed, the trail became more difficult. They had to navigate steep inclines and cross a small, fast-moving stream. The water was icy cold, and the rocks beneath were slippery with moss. Ilya nearly lost his footing, but Denis grabbed his arm just in time, pulling him to safety. Thanks, Ilya panted, his breath visible in the cool air. That was close. Tanya caught the moment on camera, turning it into another piece of their adventure. Just another challenge on our journey, she said with a smile, though her eyes betrayed a hint of the fear she felt. Despite the hardships, Tanya's determination to document their journey provided a sense of purpose. Her ongoing narration and the act of filming seemed to lift their spirits, reminding them why they had embarked on this adventure in the first place. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, their ability to find light even in the darkest of places. As evening approached, the group began to search for a suitable spot to set up camp. They found a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, the ground relatively flat and covered with soft pine needles. Denise and Ilya set to work pitching the tent, while Tanya continued to film, capturing the setting sun casting long shadows across the forest floor. "We've found a perfect spot to camp for the night," she said into the camera, her voice warm with relief. "After a tough day, it feels good to have a place to rest." The group gathered around a small fire, the flickering flames providing a welcome warmth against the encroaching chill of the night. They shared a simple meal, their spirits lifted by the crackling fire and the sense of camaraderie that had deepened through their shared trials. As they settled into their sleeping bags, the events of the day played through their minds. The eerie cabin, the difficult trek, and the beauty of the forest all blended together into a tapestry of memories that would stay with them long after their journey ended. Tanya turned off her camera, giving it one last look before placing it beside her. She knew that no matter how difficult the journey became, she was capturing something extraordinary, the raw, unfiltered essence of their adventure. And so, with the fire burning low and the stars beginning to peek through the canopy, the group fell into an uneasy but necessary sleep, ready to face whatever challenges the forest would bring them next. As the fire crackled and the first stars began to pierce the canopy above, Denise found himself lost in thought. The day's events had left him with a deep sense of respect and awe for the untamed wilderness surrounding them. The eerie cabin, with its unsettling remnants, was a stark reminder of nature's unforgiving power and the mysteries it held within its depths. Dennis stared into the dancing flames, his mind drifting to stories he had read about the taiga and the people who had dared to call it home. The tale of the Lykov family, Russian old believers who had lived in isolation for over 40 years, weighed heavily on his thoughts. Their story was one of remarkable resilience and adaptation, but also of immense hardship and isolation. He imagined the Lykovs, eking out a living in the harsh conditions of the taiga, completely cut off from the world. Their lives were a testament to human endurance and the will to survive, yet also a sobering illustration of nature's relentless dominance. Dennis had always been fascinated by these stories, but now, surrounded by the same wilderness that had both sustained and challenged the Lykovs, they took on a new, profound significance. The taiga is a world unto itself, Dennis mused quietly, more to himself than to his companions. It has this incredible power to envelop you, to make you feel both insignificant and connected to something vast and timeless. And he thought about the forest's dual nature, its serene beauty and its latent danger. It was a place where life and death coexisted in a delicate balance, where the rules of the modern world ceased to apply. The taiga demanded respect and caution, rewarding those who understood its rhythms and punishing those who underestimated its power. The image of the pristine bones and the pinkish slime in the cabin replayed in his mind. What kind of forces had converged there? What stories did those remains tell? He couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something ancient and mysterious, a reminder of how little they truly knew about the depths of the forest. Dennis glanced at Tanya and Ilya, both now quiet and reflective, perhaps similarly grappling with their own thoughts. They had embarked on this journey seeking adventure and discovery, but the taiga had given them something far more profound, a glimpse into the raw, unfiltered essence of nature. His thoughts wandered to the broader implications of their journey. In the vast expanse of the taiga, human achievements seemed trivial. Here, the forest ruled supreme, its cycles of life and death continuing regardless of human presence. The stories of hermits like the Lykovs were rare because few could withstand the relentless pressure of such an existence. Out here, Dennis thought, we're just visitors. The forest was here long before us and will remain long after we're gone. This realization filled him with a sense of humility. They were merely passing through, like whispers in a vast, ancient symphony played by the wind through the trees. The forest had its own stories, its own history written in the rings of trees and the flow of rivers. Dennis felt a surge of gratitude for this experience. Despite the dangers and discomforts, it was a rare opportunity to connect with nature on its terms. It was a chance to step outside the bubble of civilization and experience the world in its rawest form. As the fire dwindled to embers, Dennis made a silent vow to honor the taiga's lessons. He would approach the rest of their journey with a renewed sense of respect and wonder, embracing both the beauty and the challenges that lay ahead. The taiga had opened his eyes to a deeper understanding of life's fragility and resilience, a perspective he knew would stay with him long after they left the forest behind. After dinner, the group settled into their makeshift camp, the warmth of the fire providing a comforting contrast to the cool night air. Tanya, exhausted from the day's events, quickly fell asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. Ilya, too, soon drifted off, leaving Denis alone with his thoughts as he kept watch by the dying fire. The forest around him was alive with the subtle sounds of the night. The rustling of leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the occasional snap of a twig kept him alert. But it wasn't the noises of the forest that unsettled him. It was the lingering sense of unease from their encounter at the cabin that gnawed at the edges of his mind. Denis stared into the glowing embers, their soft light casting flickering shadows on the trees. He replayed the details of the cabin in his mind: the pinkish slime, the unnaturally clean bones, the fresh animal tracks, and the fragile black soot. Each element was disturbing on its own, but together they created an image that was profoundly disconcerting. What was that place, he wondered aloud, his voice barely more than a whisper in the stillness. The slime, in particular, troubled him. It seemed almost otherworldly, unlike anything he had seen before. Was it a natural phenomenon, or something else entirely? The idea that they had stumbled upon a site of some unknown event or presence filled him with an indescribable dread. Denis felt a shiver run down his spine despite the fire's warmth. He glanced at his sleeping friends, their faces calm and untroubled in the firelight. He envied their ability to find rest after such a day, but his mind was too active, too consumed by the day's mysteries to allow for sleep. He thought back to the moment when they first discovered the cabin. The sudden, intense feeling of being watched had been almost palpable. It was as if the forest itself had eyes, observing their every move. That sensation had dissipated when they left the cabin, but now, in the silence of the night, it crept back into his awareness. Denis rubbed his temples, trying to dispel the growing tension. He knew that fear could play tricks on the mind, but this was different. It wasn't just fear, it was a deep, instinctual warning, an alarm bell ringing from some primal part of his brain. What if there's something out here? Something we don't understand, he thought. The rational part of him dismissed it as paranoia, but the feeling persisted. The stories of the Lykovs and other hermits who had braved the taiga came back to him. They had survived through sheer determination and an intimate understanding of the forest's rhythms. Yet they had also lived in constant vigilance, aware of the forest's capacity for danger. Denis sighed, the weight of his thoughts pressing heavily on him. He knew that dwelling on these fears wouldn't help, but he couldn't shake the sense that their journey had stirred something in the forest, something ancient and powerful. He added another log to the fire, watching as the flames leapt up, briefly illuminating the surrounding darkness. In the flickering light, the forest seemed to pulse with a life of its own, an ever-watchful presence just beyond the reach of the fire's glow. Denis resolved to stay vigilant, his senses attuned to any sign of danger. He couldn't explain the source of his anxiety, but he trusted his instincts. The taiga was a place of beauty and mystery, but also one of unpredictability and peril. They had ventured into its heart, and now they had to respect its rules. As the night wore on, Denis remained by the fire, his eyes scanning the shadows and his mind racing with thoughts. He knew that the morning would bring new challenges, but for now he was determined to protect his friends, to keep the unknown at bay until the dawn's light could dispel the darkness. In the quiet hours of the night, surrounded by the vast, untamed wilderness, Denis felt a profound connection to the forest, a mixture of awe and respect. Whatever lay ahead, he knew that they would face it together, guided by the lessons learned from their brush with the enigmatic and the unknown. The morning light filtered through the dense canopy as Denis and Ilya packed up their camp. Tanya was already awake, her camera capturing the early morning beauty of the taiga. As they prepared to continue their journey, Denis couldn't shake the thoughts that had kept him up most of the night. He decided to share his concerns with Ilya. "Ilya, can we talk for a minute?" Denis said, his tone serious. Ilya looked up from his task of rolling up his sleeping bag, sensing the weight in Denis's voice. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Denis glanced at Tanya, who was engrossed in filming, before leading Ilya a few steps away. "It's about the cabin. There's something that's been bothering me." Ilya nodded, listening intently. "Yeah, it was definitely a creepy place. What specifically is bothering you?" "It's the animal remains," Dinas began, his voice lowering. "They were too clean. The bones were completely stripped of flesh, almost like they'd been processed. And that slime, I've never seen anything like it. It just doesn't add up." Ilya frowned, considering Dinas's words. Maybe someone used the cabin as a hunting outpost and just didn't clean up after themselves. It could explain the bones and the tracks. Dinas shook his head, his expression troubled. "I thought about that too, but it doesn't explain everything. The soot was so old, yet it seemed like the fire had happened recently. And the tracks, they were fresh. But what kind of hunter leaves bones in such a state?" Ilya shrugged, trying to offer a rational explanation. People can be strange. Maybe it was just a messy place where someone processed their game and didn't care about cleanliness. Dinas sighed, knowing that Ilya's suggestion made sense but still feeling uneasy, I suppose. But it reminded me of stories I heard as a kid. Tales about people who disappeared into the taiga and were never seen again. Ilya raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What kind of stories?" "When I was little, my grandmother used to tell me about the dangers of the taiga," Dinas said, his voice taking on a reflective tone. "She spoke of entire families that vanished without a trace. People believed that the forest could swallow you whole if you weren't careful. There were stories of spirits, ancient curses, and, well, other things." Ilya chuckled softly, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, Dinas, those are just old wives' tales to scare kids. We're rational adults. There's always a logical explanation." Dinas smiled faintly but couldn't fully shake his apprehension. I know. But sometimes being out here you start to wonder. The forest has a way of making you feel small, insignificant, like anything could happen and no one would ever know." Ilya placed a reassuring hand on Dinas's shoulder. "Hey, we're in this together. Whatever's out there, we'll face it. Just like we faced everything else. And who knows, maybe we'll find a more reasonable explanation for that cabin." Dinas nodded, appreciating Ilya's support. "You're right, it's just. I can't help but feel we should be extra cautious. This place, it's not like anywhere else we've been." "I hear you," Ilya replied. "Let's keep our eyes open and stick together. We've got this." With that, they rejoined Tanya, who had finished her morning filming and was ready to move on. As they resumed their journey, the conversation lingered in Dinas's mind. The taiga's mysteries were vast and impenetrable, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they had only just begun to uncover them. But with Ilya and Tanya by his side, he felt a renewed sense of determination. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, guided by their shared experiences and the bond that had grown stronger with each passing day in the wild. As they continued their trek through the dense forest, the conversation between Dinas and Ilya shifted to a more somber tone. The uneasy feeling from the cabin lingered, and Dinas felt compelled to share a story that had haunted him since childhood. Ilya, Dinas began, his voice tinged with the weight of the tale he was about to recount. "There's something else I want to tell you. It's a story my father told me when I was young, one that always sent chills down my spine." Ilya glanced at Dinas, curiosity piqued. "Go on, I'm listening." Dinas took a deep breath, the memory of his father's solemn voice vividly returning to him. "It happened many years ago, in a village not too far from here. A woman named Marina went missing. She was well known and well loved in the village, and her disappearance sent everyone into a panic. They organized search parties, scouring the forest for any sign of her." Ilya nodded, his attention fully captured. "Did they find her?" Dinas continued, his voice low and steady. "After 2 days of searching, they did. But what they found wasn't what they expected. They discovered her remains in a small clearing deep in the taiga. Her bones were completely clean, stripped of all flesh, and bleached white as if they had been lying there for years." Ilya's eyes widened in shock. "But how is that possible? She had only been missing for 2 days." "That's the terrifying part," Dinas said, shivering despite the warmth of the sun. There was no logical explanation. The villagers were horrified. They couldn't understand how her body had decomposed so rapidly, nor how her bones could appear so aged. Some of them whispered about dark forces at work, ancient spirits of the forest, or curses that befell those who ventured too deep into the taiga. Ilya frowned, clearly disturbed by the story. What did the villagers do after that? Denis sighed, the memory of his father's grave expression filling his mind. The village was never the same. People became more cautious, avoiding the deeper parts of the forest. They started leaving offerings at the edge of the woods, hoping to appease whatever might be lurking within. The story of Marina's disappearance became a warning to all who heard it. The taiga is not a place to be taken lightly. Ilya looked around at the towering trees and thick underbrush, a new sense of apprehension settling over him. Do you think there could be some truth to those stories? That there might be something out here, something we don't understand? Denis hesitated before answering, his eyes scanning the forest, as if expecting to see something out of the ordinary. I don't know. My rational mind says it's just a story, a way to explain the inexplicable. But being out here, seeing what we've seen, I can't help but wonder. There's so much about this place that we don't know, that we can't know. Ilya nodded slowly, absorbing Denis's words. I guess we should be careful then. Respect the forest and its mysteries. Exactly, Denis agreed. The taiga is beautiful, but it's also powerful and unpredictable. We have to remember that we're just visitors here. As they walked on, the forest seemed to close in around them, its ancient trees and dense foliage creating a world that felt both timeless and impenetrable. Denis's story lingered in the air, a reminder of the countless secrets the taiga held within its depths. The two friends continued in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The path ahead was uncertain, but they knew they had to face whatever lay ahead with caution and respect. The taiga had given them a glimpse of its mysteries, and they were determined to tread carefully, aware that the forest could just as easily take as it could give. With a renewed sense of vigilance, they pressed on, the memory of Marina's chilling fate serving as a solemn reminder of the forest's enigmatic power. The forest was a different world at night. The fire had long since died down to embers, and the camp was cloaked in the deep, velvety darkness of the taiga. Denis and Ilya lay in their sleeping bags, the weight of the day's exertions slowly giving way to sleep. The night was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Suddenly, Ilya's eyes snapped open. He lay still, straining to hear through the dense silence. There it was again, a deep, resonant wail that seemed to echo through the trees. The sound was otherworldly, sending a shiver down his spine. Ilya sat up, his heart pounding in his chest, and reached over to shake Denis awake. Denis, wake up, he whispered urgently, his voice trembling. Denis groggily opened his eyes, blinking in confusion. What is it, he mumbled, still half asleep. Listen, Ilya insisted, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you hear that? Denis sat up, rubbing his eyes and focusing his attention on the forest around them. At first there was only silence, but then the mournful wail echoed through the trees once more, chilling them both to the bone. Denis's senses sharpened, his drowsiness evaporating in an instant. He listened intently, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. It was distant, yet it seemed to carry an eerie, almost human-like quality. His mind raced with possibilities, but he forced himself to remain calm. It's probably just a moose, Denis said, trying to reassure Ilya. They make all sorts of strange noises, especially during mating season. Ilya nodded, but his eyes were wide with fear. Are you sure? It sounds so unnatural. Denis took a deep breath, trying to project calmness he didn't entirely feel. I'm not completely sure, but it's the most logical explanation. The taiga is full of animals that make eerie sounds. Remember, it's their home, not ours. They both fell silent, listening intently as the wail echoed once more, then faded into the night. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, and the usual nocturnal sounds seemed to have ceased entirely. Denis shifted closer to Ilya, his voice low and steady. We'll stay alert just in case, but panicking won't help us. We need to stay rational and remember what we know about the forest." Ilya nodded, taking comfort in Denis's calm demeanor. They both knew that fear could cloud their judgment, and in the taiga, staying focused was crucial. They sat in silence for a long while, the only sounds their own breathing and the occasional crackle of the dying embers. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs put them on edge, but they forced themselves to remain calm, their senses heightened and ready. The eerie wail did not return, and slowly, the usual sounds of the forest began to resume. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, and the sighing of the wind through the trees helped to ease their tension. "I think it's gone," Denis said softly, his eyes scanning the dark forest around them. "Let's try to get some rest. We'll need our strength for tomorrow." Ilya nodded again, though he knew sleep would not come easily. He lay back down, his body still tense, and watched as Denis fed another log to the fire, rekindling its comforting glow. Denis lay down as well, his mind racing with thoughts of the strange wail and the mysteries of the taiga. Despite his words of reassurance to Ilya, he couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching them, that there were secrets lurking just beyond their understanding. As they lay there, the fire casting flickering shadows on the trees, both men knew that the taiga was a place of beauty and danger, wonder and fear. And on this night, as the forest whispered its ancient secrets, they felt the weight of those truths more keenly than ever. As dawn broke, casting a soft golden light over the forest, Denis sat alone by the dying embers of the fire. The night's events had left him restless, and sleep had been elusive. The unsettling wail that had woken Ilya still echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder of the mysteries lurking in the taiga. He stared into the fading flames, lost in thought. For the first time in his long career of trekking through wildernesses and exploring uncharted territories, Denis felt a powerful urge to turn back. The feeling gnawed at him, an unshakable sense of unease that he couldn't quite pinpoint. It wasn't just the eerie sounds of the night or the unsettling discoveries in the abandoned cabin. It was something deeper, a primal instinct warning him of unseen dangers. Denis prided himself on his rationality and his ability to remain calm in the face of uncertainty. But now, that steadfast confidence wavered. The taiga felt different, almost sentient, as if it were watching and waiting. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were intruding on something ancient and powerful, something that didn't want them there. He glanced at Ilya and Tanya, still asleep in their sleeping bags, their faces peaceful and unaware of the turmoil churning within him. He envied their ability to rest, to push aside the fears that now gripped him so tightly. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. He was the leader, the one who was supposed to keep them safe, to make the right decisions. Denis sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "What's happening to me?" he wondered aloud, the words barely more than a whisper. He had faced dangerous situations before, treacherous terrains, unpredictable weather, even encounters with wild animals. But never had he felt such a profound desire to abandon an expedition. He remembered his father's advice from when he was a boy: always trust your instincts, Denis. They're there for a reason, yet the conflict within him grew. Was this urge to turn back a genuine instinct for survival, or was it simply fear clouding his judgment? The forest around him seemed to hold its breath, the morning air thick with a tension he couldn't quite describe. The usual sounds of wildlife were muted, as if the forest itself was aware of his inner conflict. He knew he needed to discuss this with Ilya and Tanya to weigh the options together, but he hesitated. How could he explain this uncharacteristic doubt? How could he admit that, for the first time, he wanted to give up and turn back? He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. They had come so far, faced so many challenges already. To turn back now felt like admitting defeat, yet the thought of pressing deeper into the unknown filled him with dread. The taiga was testing him, pushing him to his limits in ways he hadn't anticipated. The sun continued to rise, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Denis watched as the light gradually dispelled the darkness, feeling a small measure of comfort in the warmth of the new day. He knew that whatever decision they made, it needed to be carefully considered, not driven by fear or anxiety. Finally, he stood up, stretching his stiff muscles. He walked over to Ilya, gently shaking him awake. "Ilya, wake up. We need to talk. Ilya stirred, blinking sleepily. What's going on? Denis sat down beside him, his expression serious. I've been thinking about everything: the cabin, the noises, all of it. And for the first time, I'm wondering if we should turn back. Ilya's eyes widened in surprise. Turn back? Denis, we've never turned back before. I know, Denis replied, his voice steady but troubled. But something about this place is different. I can't shake the feeling that we're in over our heads. I need to know what you think, and we need to talk to Tanya too. Ilya sat up fully, considering Denis's words. Let's wake her up and discuss it. If you're feeling this way, we need to take it seriously. As they roused Tanya and gathered around the remnants of the fire, Denis felt a flicker of relief. Sharing his concerns, bringing them into the open, was the first step. Together they would decide the best course of action, balancing their sense of adventure with the need for caution. The taiga had tested them, but they were not alone. And whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The night enveloped the forest in its silent embrace, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Ilya lay in his sleeping bag, his eyes closed in a restless attempt to find sleep. But as the darkness deepened, a deep, guttural wail pierced through the stillness, jolting him awake. His heart raced as he sat up, his senses alert to the eerie sound echoing through the trees. It was a primal, haunting cry, reminiscent of a moose's mating call, but somehow different, more ominous, more unsettling. He glanced around the camp, seeking reassurance in the familiar faces of Denis and Tanya, but they were still lost in sleep, oblivious to the night's disturbance. Ilya, what's wrong? Denis's voice cut through the darkness, concern evident in his tone. Ilya turned to face him, his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Did you hear that? That wail, it sounded so. Relax. Ilya, Denis interrupted, his voice calm but authoritative. It's probably just a moose. They make all sorts of strange noises, especially during mating season. Nothing to worry about. But Ilya couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clenched at his chest. He listened intently for any sign of the wail's return, but all he heard was the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. Minutes passed, stretching into an eternity as he waited for the sound to pierce the silence once more. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the wail ceased, leaving behind a palpable sense of unease. Ilya glanced at Denis, his eyes wide with fear. But what if it wasn't just a moose? What if? Denis placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, cutting off his anxious thoughts. Ilya, I understand your concern, but we can't let fear control us. We'll keep watch, just to be safe, but I'm confident it was nothing more than an animal. Despite Denis's attempt to calm him, Ilya couldn't shake the feeling of foreboding that lingered in the air. He knew he wouldn't sleep again that night, the memory of the wail haunting his thoughts like a ghostly echo in the darkness. As the night wore on, Ilya sat vigil by the dying embers of the fire, his senses alert to any sign of danger. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something unseen to reveal itself. And though the night passed without further incident, the memory of the wail lingered, a silent reminder of the mysteries that lurked in the heart of the taiga. As the first light of dawn filtered through the canopy, Tanya set about preparing breakfast inside the tent, her hands deftly maneuvering the portable gas stove to boil water for coffee. But her actions did not go unnoticed by Denis, whose expression darkened as he watched her. Tanya, what are you doing? Denis's voice was sharp with concern, cutting through the morning calm. Tanya looked up, surprised by the sudden intensity in his tone. I'm just making coffee, she replied, gesturing to the gas stove. Denis's frown deepened. You can't use that in the tent, Tanya. It's dangerous. Tanya's brow furrowed in confusion. But we've done it before. What's the harm? Denis sighed, frustration evident in his voice. The harm is that it's a fire hazard, Tanya. A single spark could ignite the tent, and we'd have nowhere to escape. Not to mention the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning from the gas fumes. Tanya's eyes widened in realization, the gravity of Denis's words sinking in. I didn't think about that, she admitted, her voice tinged with guilt. That's why we need to be vigilant, Denis continued, his tone softer now but no less serious. Safety should always be our top priority, especially out here in the wilderness. Tanya nodded, chastened by Dennis's admonishment. I'm sorry, Dennis. I won't do it again. Dennis placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It's okay, Tanya. We all make mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from them and do better next time. With that, they resumed their morning routine, the incident serving as a sobering reminder of the dangers that lurked in their remote surroundings. As they sat together, sharing breakfast and discussing their plans for the day ahead, the specter of potential disaster hung over them like a shadow. But with Dennis's guidance and Tanya's newfound awareness, they were determined to navigate the wilderness safely, one cautious step at a time. The tension between Dennis and Tanya had been simmering beneath the surface for days, but it finally reached a boiling point one evening as they sat around the campfire. Dennis could no longer contain his frustration, and he lashed out at Tanya with a sharpness that took her by surprise. Tanya, I need to talk to you, Dennis said, his tone clipped and stern. Tanya looked up from her camera, her brow furrowing in confusion at the seriousness in Dennis's voice. What's wrong? Dennis took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words to express his mounting irritation. It's about your blog, Tanya. I've been watching the content you've been creating, and I have to be honest, it's not what I expected. Tanya's eyes widened in disbelief, hurt flashing across her features. What do you mean? I thought you supported me. I do support you, Tanya, Dennis replied, his voice tinged with frustration. But I can't ignore the fact that the content you're producing, it's shallow. It's trivial. It's not contributing anything meaningful to the world. Tanya's cheeks flushed with indignation, her fingers tightening around the camera in her lap. I don't understand. I'm just trying to share my experiences, to document our journey. What's wrong with that? Dennis shook his head, exasperation evident in his voice. There's nothing wrong with sharing our experiences, but do you really think your audience cares about the color of your nail polish or what you had for breakfast? We're out here in the wilderness, Tanya. There's so much more to explore, so much more to learn, and yet, all you seem to care about is getting likes and followers. Tanya's eyes welled with tears, hurt and anger warring within her. You don't understand, Dennis. This blog, it's my passion. It's what I've always wanted to do. Dennis's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. I understand that, Tanya, but passion without purpose is meaningless. You have a platform, a voice. Don't you think you should use it for something more than just self-promotion? The silence that followed was heavy with tension, the crackling of the fire, the only sound breaking the stillness of the night. Tanya struggled to find a response, her emotions swirling in a turbulent mix of hurt and defiance. I'll think about what you said, she finally replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But this is who I am, Dennis. I can't change that. Dennis sighed, a pang of guilt gnawing at his conscience. I'm not asking you to change who you are, Tanya. I just want you to consider the impact of your actions, the message you're sending to the world. With that, they lapsed into an uneasy silence, the rift between them widening with each passing moment. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the clearing, a stark reminder of the darkness that had crept into their once unbreakable bond. And as they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, they knew that resolving their differences would be a journey fraught with challenges and uncertainty. But they also knew that they had to try, for the sake of their friendship and the fragile peace of their shared wilderness. As the group approached the swiftly flowing river, they realized that they faced a new challenge: how to cross to the other side safely. Dennis surveyed the rushing water, his brow furrowed in thought, before turning to Tanya with a suggestion. Tanya, I think it would be best if you crossed on that fallen tree, Dennis said, pointing to a thick trunk that spanned the width of the river. It's safer than wading through the cold water. Tanya hesitated, her gaze flickering nervously between the tree and the churning river below. She had always been wary of water, especially when it was deep and fast-moving, and the thought of wading through it sent a shiver down her spine. I don't know, Tanya replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. It looks awfully slippery. What if I fall? Dennis placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his expression earnest. I'll be right behind you, Tanya. I won't let anything happen to you. And besides, it's better than risking hypothermia in that icy water. Tanya chewed her lip, weighing her options. She knew Dinas was right, the water did look dangerously cold, and the fallen tree seemed like the safer choice. With a reluctant nod, she squared her shoulders and made her decision. Okay, let's do it, Tanya said, steeling herself for the crossing ahead. With Dinas close behind, Tanya carefully stepped onto the fallen tree, her heart pounding in her chest. The rough bark dug into the soles of her boots as she edged her way across, each step a delicate balance between caution and determination. As she progressed, Tanya couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that washed over her. The river roared below, its icy waters a constant reminder of the danger she faced. But she focused on the task at hand, blocking out the fear and concentrating on putting one foot in front of the other. Meanwhile, Dinas kept a watchful eye on Tanya, ready to offer support at a moment's notice. He admired her courage, her willingness to confront her fears head-on in the pursuit of their shared goal. And as she neared the opposite bank, her movement steady and sure, he felt a surge of pride in her accomplishment. Finally, with a sigh of relief, Tanya reached the safety of the other side, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She turned to Dinas, a triumphant smile lighting up her face. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with pride and gratitude. Dinas returned her smile, his own relief palpable. "Yes, we did," he replied, reaching out to give her a congratulatory pat on the back. "And you were amazing, Tanya. I knew you could do it." With the river behind them, and the next leg of their journey stretching out before them, Dinas and Tanya shared a moment of quiet celebration. They had faced a challenge together and emerged victorious, their bond strengthened by the shared experience. And as they continued on their way, they knew that whatever obstacles lay ahead, they would face them together, united in their determination and mutual respect. As the group made their precarious journey across the river, Tanya's eyes scanned the opposite bank, searching for a safe landing spot. But what she saw froze her in her tracks, a dark, looming shape lying motionless on the shore. It took her a moment to register what she was seeing, but when she did, a cold shiver ran down her spine. "Guys, look," Tanya called out, her voice trembling with fear as she pointed to the grisly discovery. Dinas and the others followed her gaze, their eyes widening in horror at the sight before them. There, sprawled on the riverbank, was the carcass of a moose, its massive form twisted and contorted in a grotesque parody of life. The once majestic animal lay still and lifeless, its fur matted with blood and its glassy eyes staring blankly into the distance. A tense silence fell over the group as they absorbed the chilling sight. The air seemed to grow heavy with unease, the normal sounds of the forest muted by the weight of their discovery. The moose looked wrong, somehow unnatural, as if it didn't belong in this world. It's like something out of a nightmare," Tanya whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Dinas nodded grimly, his jaw set in a tight line. "We need to be careful," he cautioned, his eyes scanning the surrounding trees for any sign of danger. "This isn't a good sign." The others nodded in agreement, their nerves on edge as they contemplated the implications of their find. The moose's death seemed to hang heavy in the air, a grim reminder of the dangers that lurked in the wilderness. As they continued on their journey, the memory of the dead moose lingered in the back of their minds, casting a shadow over their once optimistic spirits. They knew that they had to stay vigilant, to be on guard against whatever unseen threats might be lurking in the depths of the forest. And as they moved forward, the sense of foreboding that had settled over them served as a chilling reminder of the unpredictable and unforgiving nature of the wilderness. They were but small and vulnerable travelers in a vast and untamed world, and they knew that they could never afford to let their guard down, not even for a moment. As the group stood on the riverbank, the tension thick in the air, Ilya and Dinas moved to reassure Tanya, their voices calm and soothing amidst the eerie silence of the forest. "Tanya, listen," Ilya began, his tone gentle yet firm. "I know this is scary, but we need to stay calm. Bears usually avoid humans, especially if we don't pose a threat to them." Dinas nodded in agreement, his gaze steady as he met Tanya's wide-eyed stare. "Ilya's right, Tanya. We've encountered bears before, And as long as we stay vigilant and make plenty of noise, we should be fine. Tanya's breathing began to slow, the panic in her chest easing slightly at their reassurances. She trusted Ilya and Dennis. They were experienced outdoorsmen, and she knew they wouldn't lead them into danger. "Okay," she said, her voice still shaky but more controlled. "I'll try to calm down." With Tanya's nerves somewhat settled, Dennis turned his attention to the grim scene before them. He knew they couldn't ignore the moose carcass. It was a part of the wilderness, a puzzle piece in the intricate tapestry of life and death. "Let me take a few photos," Dennis said, his voice quiet but determined. "We can study the remains later, try to understand what happened here." With a nod from the others, Dennis carefully approached the moose carcass, his camera in hand. He took several shots from different angles, capturing the stark reality of death in the wilderness. As he worked, Ilya and Tanya stood watch, their senses alert for any sign of danger. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the air heavy with the weight of the unknown. Finally, Dennis finished documenting the scene, his expression somber as he rejoined the group. "Let's keep moving," he said, his voice low but steady. "We'll report this to the authorities when we get back, but for now, our priority is to stay safe." With renewed determination, the group set off once more, their footsteps echoing in the quiet stillness of the forest. Though the memory of the dead moose lingered in their minds, they refused to let fear paralyze them. Together they would press on, united in their resolve to navigate the challenges of the wilderness and emerge stronger on the other side. As the group continued along the forest path, a sense of unease settled over them like a heavy fog. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed to set their nerves on edge, and they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Ilya was the first to notice it, a flicker of movement among the trees, too quick to be anything natural. He stopped in his tracks, his senses on high alert, as he scanned the shadows for any sign of movement. "Did you guys see that?" Ilya whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. Dennis and Tanya exchanged a glance, their expressions mirroring Ilya's growing apprehension. They had all seen it, the subtle shifts in the foliage, the fleeting glimpses of movement just beyond their line of sight. "It's probably just animals," Dennis said, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "But let's not take any chances. We need to make some noise, let them know we're here." With that, Dennis began to clap his hands and stomp his feet, creating a cacophony of sound that echoed through the forest. The sudden noise seemed to startle whatever lurked in the shadows, and the movement ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. Tanya's grip on her camera tightened, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched Dennis's efforts to scare off whatever or whoever was watching them. She knew he was trying to protect them, but the fear lingered in the back of her mind like a stubborn shadow. As they resumed their journey, the tension in the air remained palpable, the sense of being watched never far from their thoughts. But with Dennis leading the way, his determination to keep them safe unwavering, they pressed on, determined to reach their destination despite the lurking dangers of the wilderness. And though the shadows seemed to dance at the edge of their vision, and every sound sent a shiver down their spines, they drew strength from each other, their bond forged in the crucible of adversity. Together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their determination to overcome the trials of the forest and emerge stronger on the other side. As they trekked deeper into the wilderness, Dennis couldn't shake the nagging sense of unease that had settled in the pit of his stomach. The sightings of movement among the trees, the eerie stillness of the forest, it all added up to a mounting sense of danger that he couldn't ignore. "Guys, I think we should turn back," Dennis suggested, his voice tinged with urgency. "It's not safe to continue, especially with the possibility of a bear nearby." Tanya's brow furrowed in concern, but her gaze remained fixed on her camera, the weight of her decision evident in the furrow of her brow. "I can't," she replied, her voice strained with determination. "We're in the middle of nowhere, Dennis. If we turn back now, we'll lose valuable footage for my vlog. I can't afford to let my subscribers down." Dennis's frustration bubbled to the surface, his patience wearing thin as he struggled to convey the seriousness of the situation. "Tanya, this isn't about your vlog," he insisted, his voice rising slightly with agitation. "This is about our safety. We can't risk our lives for the sake of a few views." Tanya's gaze flickered with uncertainty, torn between her desire to capture every moment for her audience and the very real danger that lurked in the shadows. But in the end, her ambition won out over her fear. "I'm sorry, Dina," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "But I have to keep going. I can't let fear dictate my decisions." With a heavy heart, Dinas nodded, resigned to the fact that Tanya's priorities lay elsewhere. "Fine," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "But if anything happens, it's on you." And so, with a sense of trepidation weighing heavily on their hearts, they forged ahead into the unknown, their footsteps echoing in the quiet stillness of the forest. Though Dinas's concerns lingered like a shadow over their journey, Tanya remained steadfast in her resolve, determined to capture every moment, no matter the cost. And as they disappeared into the depths of the wilderness, they knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but they were willing to face it head-on, united in their shared quest for adventure and discovery. As the evening descended and the group settled around the crackling campfire, Dinas and Elia huddled together, their voices hushed as they discussed the unsettling discovery of the moose carcass. The fire cast flickering shadows across their faces, adding an eerie intensity to their conversation. "I just can't shake the feeling that something's not right about those remains," Dinas murmured, his brow furrowed in thought. "I mean, look at how clean those bones are. It's like they've been bleached by the sun." Ilya nodded, his expression mirroring Dinas's unease. "I know what you mean. It's not normal for predators like bears or wolves to strip a carcass so completely. And the way the bones are arranged, it's almost deliberate." Dinas's eyes widened, a dawning realization creeping over him. "You don't think he began?" his voice trailing off as he glanced around the darkening forest, suddenly aware of the shadows lurking just beyond the fire's glow. "I don't know what to think," Ilya admitted, his voice barely more than a whisper. "But whatever did that to the moose, I don't want to meet it in a dark alley, let alone out here in the wilderness." The conversation lapsed into a tense silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound breaking the stillness of the night. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something unseen to reveal itself. As they sat in the glow of the fire, Dinas and Elia couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. The wilderness, once a place of wonder and adventure, now seemed fraught with hidden dangers and unknown threats. But despite their fears, they knew they couldn't let paranoia consume them. They were seasoned adventurers, experienced in the ways of the wild. They would remain vigilant, watchful for any signs of danger, but they would not let fear dictate their actions. With a shared nod, Dinas and Elia returned to the fire, their faces set in determined lines. They would keep a closer eye on their surroundings, but they would not let the mysteries of the forest deter them from their goal. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their resolve to conquer the unknown. As the group ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, they found themselves faced with a daunting array of obstacles: fallen trees, tangled undergrowth, and treacherous terrain that seemed determined to impede their progress at every turn. They pushed on, their determination unyielding, their footsteps echoing in the silent expanse of the wilderness. As they navigated the dense thicket, their thoughts turned to the hermit they sought, a man who had once lived a life of asceticism, shunning the comforts of civilization for the solitude of the forest. Now, however, he relied on provisions from the nearby monastery, a fact that intrigued and puzzled the group. What could have driven him to such extremes? Tanya mused aloud, her voice barely more than a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the ancient stillness of the forest, to forsake the comforts of society for a life of isolation. Dinas nodded, his gaze scanning the dense foliage ahead. "It's a question that has puzzled scholars and adventurers for centuries," he replied, his voice tinged with respect for the hermit's choice. "Some seek solitude as a means of spiritual enlightenment, while others simply wish to escape the complexities of modern life." Ilya, always the pragmatist, added his own thoughts to the conversation. Perhaps he simply grew tired of the trappings of society and sought a simpler, more meaningful existence, he suggested, his tone thoughtful. As they trudged onward, each step bringing them closer to their elusive goal, the group fell into a contemplative silence. The beauty of the forest, with its towering trees and dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, served as a stark contrast to the harsh realities of the hermit's life. Finally, After what seemed like an eternity of bushwhacking and backtracking, they caught sight of a humble cabin nestled in a small clearing, a sign that they were nearing their destination. With renewed determination, they quickened their pace, eager to unravel the mysteries of the hermit's life and perhaps glean some insight into their own journey of self-discovery. Tanya's decision to abstain from alcohol was rooted in a painful childhood memory that had left a lasting impact on her life. She opened up to her companions about the traumatic experience that had shaped her attitude towards drinking. As a child, Tanya's father had struggled with alcoholism, often disappearing for days on end, leaving her and her mother to fend for themselves. On one occasion, when Tanya was just a young girl, she had accidentally consumed alcohol, mistaking it for juice. The effects had been immediate and overwhelming, leaving her frightened and confused. But it wasn't just that isolated incident that had scarred Tanya, it was the constant cycle of neglect and instability that had defined her early years. Her mother, overwhelmed by caring for Tanya and her sick grandmother, had been unable to provide the stability and support that Tanya desperately needed. After her grandmother's death, Tanya's mother had finally mustered the strength to confront her husband's addiction, ultimately driving him away. While this decision had been necessary for the family's well-being, it had also left Tanya with a deep sense of abandonment and loss. "It was a turning point in my life," Tanya explained, her voice tinged with sadness. "I realized then that I never wanted to be like my father, that I never wanted to let alcohol control me or my choices." Her story resonated deeply with her companions, who listened with empathy and understanding. They admired Tanya's strength and resilience, recognizing the courage it took for her to confront her past and make a conscious decision to break the cycle of alcoholism that had plagued her family for generations. As they sat around the campfire, the flames casting a warm glow over their faces, Tanya's story served as a powerful reminder of the importance of empathy and compassion. It was a reminder that everyone had their own struggles and demons to face, and that understanding and support were the keys to overcoming them. As the group's journey continued, a new layer of understanding began to unfold between Dinis and Tanya. The revelation about Tanya's past and her efforts to protect herself by concealing the truth about her father had a profound effect on Dinis. He started to see Tanya in a different light, no longer just as a superficial blogger, but as a person with a complex and difficult history. Dinis felt a surge of empathy and compassion towards Tanya, recognizing the strength it must have taken for her to endure such hardships. He admired her resilience and determination to overcome her past, and he found himself drawn to her in a way he hadn't expected. As they shared more moments together, Dinis began to see Tanya's true character shining through. He admired her courage in facing her demons and was inspired by her ability to remain positive and hopeful despite the challenges she had faced. Their newfound understanding brought them closer, forging a bond based on mutual respect and shared experiences. Dinis found himself opening up to Tanya in ways he hadn't with anyone else, sharing his own struggles and insecurities. And as they journeyed deeper into the wilderness, Dinis realized that Tanya was more than just a fellow traveler. She was a kindred spirit, someone who understood him in a way no one else could. And in that realization, he knew that their connection was something special, something worth cherishing. As the group trekked further into the dense forest, Dinis couldn't help but notice a subtle change in Tanya's demeanor. She seemed quieter, her usual bright energy dimmed by an invisible weight. Her eyes, usually sparkling with curiosity and enthusiasm, now appeared clouded with sadness. Dinis decided to take action. He rummaged through his pack and pulled out a thermal blanket, then gently draped it over Tanya's shoulders. "Hey, you look like you could use a little warmth," he said with a soft smile, his eyes filled with concern and care. Tanya looked up, surprised by the gesture. She felt the warmth of the blanket and the kindness behind Dinis's actions, and it brought a small, grateful smile to her lips. "Thanks, Dinis," she murmured, her spirits lifting slightly. She took a deep breath and felt a renewed sense of comfort and security. Dinis's simple act of kindness rekindled Tanya's enthusiasm. She picked up her camera and began filming again, narrating their journey with a bit more energy and positivity. Dinis watched her with a sense of pride and relief, glad to see her regaining some of her usual spark. However, as the day progressed, the weather began to turn. dark clouds rolled in, casting a gloomy shadow over the forest. The wind picked up, howling through the trees and creating an eerie, unsettling atmosphere. The once vibrant and inviting forest now seemed ominous and foreboding. Tanya, who usually filled the air with her cheerful chatter and observations, grew increasingly silent. The change in the weather had an undeniable effect on her mood. She shivered under the thermal blanket, not just from the cold, but from the unease that settled over her like a heavy fog. The whispering wind and the creaking branches made her feel exposed and vulnerable. Dinis noticed her discomfort and tried to engage her in conversation, hoping to distract her from the unsettling environment. "Remember the last trip we took? The weather was just as bad, but we managed to find that amazing cave," he said, trying to bring back a lighter memory. Tanya nodded, appreciating Dinis's effort. "Yeah, that was something," she replied, her voice softer than usual. She tried to focus on the positive, but the oppressive atmosphere made it difficult. The group pressed on, each step taking them deeper into the murky woods. The silence was palpable, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of an unseen bird. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees standing like silent sentinels watching their every move. Despite the growing tension, Dinis remained vigilant and attentive, always keeping an eye on Tanya. He knew that her courage and resilience were being tested, and he was determined to support her through it. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing moment, forged in the crucible of the forest's challenges. Together they faced the encroaching darkness, their resolve unwavering. They knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but they also knew that they could rely on each other to find the strength to overcome whatever obstacles lay in their path. After hours of navigating through the dense, shadowy forest, the group finally reached their destination. In a small clearing stood the modest, weather-beaten cabin of Ambrosi the hermit. The cabin's wooden walls were marked by time and solitude, and a thin wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, signaling that someone was inside. Dinis, ever cautious, turned to Tanya with a serious expression. "Stay back for now," he advised. "Let's approach this carefully. We don't know how he'll react to strangers." Tanya nodded, understanding the need for caution. She stayed a few paces behind as Dinis and Ilia stepped forward, their movements slow and deliberate. As they neared the cabin, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, elderly man with a commanding presence. His cold, piercing eyes surveyed the group with an inscrutable expression. Dinis stepped forward and extended his hand in greeting. "Hello, sir. My name is Dinis, and this is my friend Ilia. We've come a long way to meet you." The old man ignored the outstretched hand, his gaze steady and unyielding. Instead, he pressed his own hand to his chest and bowed slightly, speaking in a deep, resonant voice. "I greet people my own way," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Dinis quickly withdrew his hand, adapting to the hermit's preference. He mirrored the gesture, placing his hand on his chest and bowing respectfully. "Hello, Ambrosi," he replied, his voice steady. Ambrosi gave a small nod of approval before his eyes flicked to Tanya, who was watching from a respectful distance. His gaze softened slightly as he assessed her, perhaps sensing her unease. "Come closer," he instructed, gesturing for her to join them. Tanya hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, mimicking the greeting she had just witnessed. "Hello, Ambrosi," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her stomach. Ambrosi nodded again, acknowledging her effort. "Welcome," he said simply, before turning and motioning for them to enter the cabin. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional, with a small table, a few chairs, and a simple stove. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of preserved food and various tools. The atmosphere was one of quiet solitude, a stark contrast to the chaotic world outside. As they settled into the cabin, Dinis felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had made it this far, and now they had the opportunity to learn from this enigmatic figure. He glanced at Tanya, who seemed to be regaining her composure, her eyes filled with curiosity and determination. Ambrosi moved with a deliberate grace, his actions measured and precise. He began to prepare tea, his movements a silent testament to a life of self-sufficiency and discipline. The group watched in respectful silence, aware that they were in the presence of a man who had chosen a path few could truly understand. As the tea brewed and the warmth of the cabin began to seep into their bones, Denise felt a renewed sense of purpose. This meeting was not just about survival or curiosity, it was about connecting with a way of life that had been all but forgotten. And in that connection, perhaps they would find answers to the questions that had driven them into the heart of the wilderness. As Denise, Ilya, and Tanya stood in the clearing, they couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The presence of Ambrosi, the elderly hermit, was imposing. He was a tall man with a powerful build, his rugged features and cold, piercing eyes a testament to years of isolation and self-sufficiency. His voice, when he spoke, was low and emotionless, as if the years of solitude had stripped away his capacity for warmth and feeling. Denise and Ilya exchanged glances, sensing the tension in the air. It was clear that Ambrosi's long years alone had taken a toll on him, and the atmosphere was thick with an awkward silence. The hermit's words were sparse and measured, each one delivered with a deliberate, almost mechanical precision. Ambrosi turned and motioned for them to follow him inside. As they entered the cabin, the group was struck by the starkness of their surroundings. The interior was dimly lit, the only light coming from the flickering flames in the small stove. The air was heavy with the smell of damp wood and mustiness, a reminder of the cabin's age and the hermit's long stay. Despite the gloom, the cabin was orderly, with shelves neatly lined with jars of preserved food and tools hanging in precise rows on the walls. The furniture was minimal, just a small table, a few chairs, and a simple bed in the corner. Every object seemed to have a purpose, a necessity in a life stripped of superfluous comforts. Dennis took a deep breath, trying to ease the tension in his chest. "Thank you for inviting us in, Ambrosi," he said, hoping to bridge the gap of silence with some semblance of normal conversation. Ambrosi merely nodded, his expression unchanged. "You are far from home," he replied, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to echo in the small space. Ilya shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the shelves filled with jars. "Yes, we are," he said, his voice tentative. "We wanted to learn about your life here, how you managed to live in such isolation." Ambrosi's eyes flickered for a moment, a brief spark of interest. "It's not a life many choose," he said simply, "but it is my life." Tanya, sensing the gravity of the moment, kept her camera lowered, capturing the scene but not intruding on the conversation. She was fascinated by the hermit, his stoic demeanor, and the austere environment he had created for himself. The group settled into the chairs around the small table as Ambrosi began to prepare tea, his movements precise and methodical. Denise and Ilya watched in silence, still feeling the weight of the hermit's presence and the oppressive atmosphere of the cabin. The tension was palpable, a reminder of how different their worlds were from this solitary man's existence. As they sipped the tea, its warmth a small comfort in the chilly cabin, Dennis tried once more to engage Ambrosi. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" he asked. Ambrosi nodded, his gaze distant. "Many years," he replied. "Long enough to see the seasons change and the forest grow." Dennis could see the depth of experience in the hermit's eyes, the countless days and nights spent alone in this remote place. It was both humbling and disquieting, a glimpse into a life that was both extraordinary and profoundly isolating. The awkwardness and tension lingered, but there was also a growing sense of respect. Ambrosi's life, though stark and lonely, was a testament to resilience and self-reliance. And in that dimly lit cabin, surrounded by the quiet strength of the forest, the group began to understand the profound solitude that defined the hermit's existence. Despite the hospitality extended by Ambrosi, who suggested that they stay in his cabin for the night, Dennis remained cautious. The tension of their initial encounter still hung heavily in the air, and Dennis felt uneasy about the hermit's stoic and emotionally detached demeanor. He politely declined the offer. "Thank you, Ambrosi, but we'll set up camp on the edge of the clearing. We appreciate your offer, but we prefer to keep some distance." Ambrosi simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "As you wish," he said, his voice carrying no hint of offense or disappointment. As the group moved to set up their tents at the clearing's edge, Tanya approached Denise with her camera in hand. "Denise, could you film me? I want to get some footage for the blog. This place is too unique not to share." Dinis agreed, albeit reluctantly. He took the camera from Tanya and followed her to the small greenhouse that stood a short distance from the cabin. The structure was modest, made from salvaged materials, but it was well maintained and clearly a labor of love. Tanya positioned herself in front of the greenhouse and began to speak to the camera with her usual enthusiasm. "Hey everyone, it's Tanya here, and today we've stumbled upon something truly incredible. We're deep in the heart of the forest, and we've just met Ambrosi, a hermit who has lived here for years, completely off the grid. Behind me is his greenhouse, where he grows his own food. It's amazing to see how self-sufficient he is." She continued, her voice vibrant despite the subdued atmosphere. "Ambrosi might be a man of few words, but his actions speak volumes. Everything you see here, from the greenhouse to his cabin, is a testament to a life of independence and resilience. It's not just about survival, it's about thriving in harmony with nature." Dinis kept the camera steady, capturing the greenhouse and the surrounding area as Tanya spoke. He admired her ability to find the intriguing angle in every situation, to turn even the most austere environment into a compelling narrative for her audience. She wrapped up the segment with a smile. "Stay tuned for more updates as we continue our journey. Who knows what other amazing stories we'll uncover in this remote wilderness. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more adventures." As she finished, Dinis lowered the camera, feeling a mix of admiration and concern. Tanya's dedication to her blog was impressive, but the eerie silence of the forest and the enigmatic presence of Ambrosi weighed heavily on his mind. "That was great," Tanya, Dinis said, handing the camera back to her. "But let's stay vigilant. There's something about this place, and Ambrosi, that makes me uneasy." Tanya nodded, her enthusiasm dimming slightly. "I know what you mean. He's fascinating, but there's definitely an air of mystery here. Let's just get our camp set up and stay alert." As they walked back to their campsite, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. The quiet of the forest seemed to deepen, and the group worked quickly to set up their tents and prepare for the night. Ambrosi watched them from a distance, his figure barely visible in the growing darkness. Despite the uneasy feeling that lingered, they knew that their encounter with the hermit was an experience that would stay with them for a long time, a reminder of the strange and powerful allure of the wilderness. As Dinis, Ilya, and Tanya took in their surroundings, they couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. The initial intrigue of Ambrosi's solitary lifestyle was quickly overshadowed by the reality of his environment. The cabin and the surrounding area showed signs of neglect and decay. What they had imagined as a place of rugged self-sufficiency was instead a testament to the harshness of isolation. The garden, which Ambrosi had mentioned in passing, was little more than a patch of struggling potato plants interspersed with piles of compost and discarded items. It was far from the bountiful, orderly garden they had pictured. The ground was uneven, and weeds threatened to overtake the crops that did manage to grow. The promised icons, which were supposed to grace the trees around the clearing, were nowhere to be found. Instead, the trees stood bare and silent, their branches swaying ominously in the wind. Dinis and Ilya exchanged uneasy glances. The reality of Ambrosi's life was stark and sobering. This was not the romanticized vision of a hermit living in harmony with nature. It was a harsh, lonely existence. The clutter and disrepair spoke of a man who had been cut off from the world for too long, a man whose connection to his surroundings had frayed over the years. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was no better. The interior was dimly lit and smelled of dampness and neglect. The sparse furnishings were worn and tired, and the overall impression was one of abandonment. As they sat around the small table, Ambrosi continued to speak in his monotonous, emotionless voice. His words, though informative, lacked any warmth or enthusiasm. "The potatoes are my main crop," he explained, his voice droning on without inflection. "They store well through the winter." Tanya tried to engage him, asking about his daily routines and any memorable experiences he might have had. But Ambrosi's responses were devoid of personal touch, delivered in the same flat tone that made it hard to connect with him. "I wake at dawn," he said. "I tend the garden. I gather firewood. It is a simple life." The group's initial curiosity was quickly turning into a desire to leave. The more Ambrosi spoke, the more they felt the oppressive weight of his isolation. His voice, devoid of any emotional range, seemed to echo in the small cabin, adding to the sense of strangeness and tension. Denis shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This place feels off," he whispered to Ilya when Ambrosi stepped outside for a moment. Ilya nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I thought it would be different. More serene. This is just sad and eerie." Tanya, usually so upbeat and positive, was visibly unsettled. She continued to film segments for her blog, but her usual enthusiasm was dampened. She struggled to find the right words to describe the scene without betraying her discomfort. "We're here with Ambrosi, who has lived here alone for many years," she narrated softly. "It's a very different way of life, one that requires a lot of resilience." As they finished setting up their camp on the edge of the clearing, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the forest around them grew dark and foreboding. The flickering light from their campfire cast long shadows, and the sounds of the night seemed amplified in the stillness. Ambrosi's cabin, barely visible now, loomed like a silent sentinel in the night. His figure, moving slowly around the garden, added to the eerie atmosphere. The group's earlier excitement had given way to a palpable tension, and the strange, monotonous voice of Ambrosi lingered in their minds, making them eager to move on from this unsettling place. Despite their unease, they settled in for the night, hoping that the morning light would bring some clarity and comfort. As they lay in their tents, the oppressive feeling of Ambrosi's presence and the stark reality of his life weighed heavily on them, a reminder of the profound and often unsettling impact of isolation. Denis couldn't shake the growing sense of unease that gnawed at him as he lay in his tent. Ambrosi's presence, the dilapidated state of his homestead, and his emotionless demeanor all combined to create an atmosphere of suspicion. Denis had expected to meet a typical hermit, a weathered yet serene figure in tune with nature, but Ambrosi was anything but that. There was something off, something unsettlingly enigmatic about him. The more Denis thought about their interaction, the more questions arose. Why did Ambrosi's cabin and garden look so neglected? If he had lived there for years, as he claimed, why hadn't he maintained his surroundings better? The lack of icons, which were supposed to adorn the trees, was another point of confusion. Ambrosi had spoken about them, yet they were nowhere to be seen. Instead, the clearing had an air of abandonment, the kind that spoke of a mind preoccupied with other things. Denis decided to voice his concerns to Ilya. "Something doesn't add up about Ambrosi," he whispered, making sure Tanya, who was exhausted and already asleep, didn't hear him. "He doesn't fit the image of a hermit. Everything here feels wrong." Ilya nodded, though he seemed less convinced. "Yeah, it's strange, but maybe that's just how he is. Living alone for so long can make people different." Denis wasn't satisfied with this explanation, but it's more than that. The state of his garden, the missing icons, and his voice. It's like he's devoid of any emotion. It's unsettling. As the night wore on, Denis found himself piecing together the strange events of the day. He remembered the stories he had heard about hermits, people who chose solitude to find peace or spiritual enlightenment. Ambrosi's demeanor didn't match that image. His life seemed more like a shadowy existence rather than a peaceful retreat. The next morning, as they prepared to leave, Denis couldn't resist taking another look around. He observed the cabin and the garden more closely, searching for any clues that might explain his unease. The garden, with its struggling potato plants and piles of compost, was a stark reminder of neglect. It was clear that Ambrosi's focus wasn't on cultivating the land. Denis approached Ambrosi, who was sitting on a worn-out chair outside the cabin, staring into the distance. "Ambrosi," Denis began cautiously, "we couldn't help but notice that there are no icons on the trees as you mentioned. We were curious about that." Ambrosi's cold eyes met his, and for a moment there was a flicker of something irritation, perhaps, or defensiveness. "The forest takes what it wants," he said flatly. "The icons are gone, like many things over the years." Denis felt a chill run down his spine. The answer was evasive, almost cryptic. And the garden? It looks like it hasn't been tended properly for some time. Ambrosi shrugged. "The soil here is hard, the conditions harsh. I grow what I can." Unsatisfied but unwilling to press further, Denis stepped back. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Ambrosi than met the eye. As they finally packed up and left, Dinas kept turning over the details in his mind. The hermit's monotone voice, the neglected homestead, the missing icons, each piece added to the puzzle, making Dinas more determined to find a logical explanation. As they trekked away from the cabin, Dinas's mind was a whirl of speculation. He shared his thoughts with Ilya, who listened intently. "I don't know what it is, but there's something off about that man. Maybe it's just the isolation, but we need to stay vigilant. There might be more to his story than he's letting on." Ilya agreed, albeit reluctantly. "We'll keep our eyes open, but let's not jump to conclusions. The forest has a way of playing tricks on the mind." Dinas nodded, though his suspicions remained. The encounter with Ambrosi had left a deep impression, one that he couldn't easily dismiss. As they continued their journey, the mystery of the hermit lingered in his thoughts, fueling his determination to uncover the truth behind the strange and unsettling experience. Dinas couldn't keep his thoughts to himself any longer. As they walked away from Ambrosi's cabin, he pulled Ilya aside, needing to voice his growing suspicions. "Ilya, something's not right about that man," Dinas began, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Tanya, who was trudging ahead with her camera equipment. "Everything about him feels off. The neglect around his place, the missing icons, his monotone voice. It doesn't add up." Ilya listened, his brow furrowing. "I noticed those things too, but maybe it's just how he lives. People who isolate themselves for so long can become different." Dinas shook his head. "It's more than that. He doesn't fit the image of a hermit who has found peace in solitude. His life seems decayed, like he's just going through the motions without any purpose. And did you notice how he evaded my questions? He didn't give any clear answers." Ilya considered Dinas's words. "You're right, it was strange. But what do you think is going on? Do you think he's dangerous?" "I don't know if he's dangerous," Dinas admitted, "but there's something he's not telling us. Maybe it's nothing, but we can't ignore the signs. We need to stay cautious." Ilya nodded. "We'll keep an eye out. But let's not let this ruin our trip. We came out here for an adventure, and we can't let one odd encounter derail that." Dinas agreed, though the feeling of unease still lingered. He glanced back at Ambrosi's cabin one last time, the image of the enigmatic hermit etched in his mind. The group gathered their belongings and prepared to move on. Despite their reservations, they knew they couldn't let their encounter with Ambrosi dictate their entire trip. The forest ahead beckoned with its promise of new discoveries and experiences. Dinas took a deep breath and called out to Tanya, who was adjusting her camera. "We're moving out. Let's keep going." Tanya, sensing the shift in mood, nodded and quickly finished packing her gear. "I'm ready," she said, though her usual enthusiasm was muted by the unsettling experience they had just left behind. As they resumed their trek, the mood was noticeably subdued. The dense forest seemed darker, the air heavier. Even the birds seemed quieter, as if sensing the group's discomfort. Dinas led the way, his mind racing with thoughts of Ambrosi and the strange details he couldn't shake. "I think we should stick to our plan," Dinas said, trying to infuse some determination into his voice. "We've come this far, and there's still a lot to explore. Let's focus on what's ahead." Ilya and Tanya both agreed, though the memory of the hermit lingered at the edges of their thoughts. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own reflections. The path ahead was rough, but they navigated it with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to find the adventure they had set out for. As the day wore on, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller and more imposing, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air was filled with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant animal calls, a reminder of the untamed wilderness they were traversing. Gradually, the group's spirits began to lift. The beauty of the forest and the thrill of exploration started to overshadow their earlier discomfort. Tanya began to film again, capturing the serene landscape and their progress through it. Her commentary was more measured, reflecting the sobering experience they had just endured, but her passion for documenting their journey shone through. Dinas kept a vigilant eye on their surroundings, but he also allowed himself to appreciate the natural beauty that enveloped them. The tension from Ambrosi's cabin slowly eased as they pressed forward, their focus shifting to the immediate challenges and wonders of the forest. By evening, they found a suitable spot to set up camp. The forest here was less dense, with a small clearing that allowed them to see the sky and the approaching sunset. As they set up their tents and prepared a simple meal, the earlier sense of foreboding gave way to a more peaceful atmosphere. "We did good today," Dennis said, trying to lift their spirits. "Let's get some rest and see what tomorrow brings." Ilya and Tanya nodded in agreement. As they settled in for the night, the memory of Ambrosi began to fade, replaced by the sounds of the forest and the promise of new adventures. Despite the lingering questions, they were determined to continue their journey, embracing whatever the wilderness had in store for them. As the group settled into their new campsite, Dennis couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was profoundly wrong with Ambrosi and his way of life. The hermit's hollow voice and lifeless eyes haunted his thoughts. Dennis replayed their encounter over and over in his mind, dissecting every detail. The neglected garden, the lack of icons, and Ambrosi's evasive answers all pointed to one conclusion: the old man was hiding something. Dennis glanced at Ilya and Tanya, who were busying themselves with setting up the camp. He felt a pang of responsibility. He had led them into this adventure, and now it seemed there might be unforeseen dangers lurking in the forest. He needed to be vigilant, not just for his own sake, but for theirs as well. "Keep your eyes open," he muttered to himself. "We're not out of the woods yet." That night, Dennis lay awake in his sleeping bag, listening to the sounds of the forest. The usual comforting noises now seemed ominous, the rustling leaves and distant animal calls blending into an unsettling symphony. His thoughts kept drifting back to Ambrosi's hovel. What was the hermit hiding, and why did he seem so devoid of life? Unable to sleep, Dennis decided to take action. He quietly slipped out of his tent, careful not to wake Ilya or Tanya. The forest was eerily silent as he made his way back towards Ambrosi's cabin. Moonlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting ghostly shadows on the ground. When he reached the clearing, Dennis took a moment to observe the cabin from a distance. It looked even more decrepit in the pale light, a dark silhouette against the trees. He approached cautiously, every sense on high alert. As he drew nearer, he noticed something he hadn't seen before: a small, concealed path leading behind the cabin. Dennis followed the path, his heart pounding. It wound through the trees and ended at a hidden entrance to a cellar. The door was old and wooden, with rusted hinges that creaked as he pushed it open. A musty smell wafted out, making him gag. He hesitated, then took a deep breath and descended the steps. The cellar was dimly lit by a single, flickering bulb. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, Dennis's heart raced. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars of preserved food, old tools, and most disturbingly what appeared to be personal belongings of different people: a child's toy, a woman's scarf, a man's watch. Dennis's mind raced. Why would Ambrosi have these items? They were too varied and personal to belong to just one person. He backed out of the cellar, his suspicions solidifying into a disturbing conclusion: Ambrosi wasn't just a harmless hermit. There was something far more sinister at play. He returned to the camp as quietly as he had left, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and determination. He would have to tell Ilya and Tanya in the morning, but for now he needed to rest and plan their next move. Whatever secrets Ambrosi was hiding, Dennis was determined to uncover them and ensure the safety of his friends. As he finally drifted off to a restless sleep, one thought kept echoing in his mind: they were not safe. Not until they were far away from Ambrosi and his eerie abode. The next morning, Dennis woke up with a heavy heart. The uneasy feeling from the previous night still lingered, amplified by his discoveries. As he prepared breakfast, his mind was clouded with thoughts of Ambrosi. What he had found in the cellar disturbed him deeply, and he knew he had to share it with Ilya and Tanya. After breakfast, as they packed up their camp, Dennis gathered his friends around the dying embers of their fire. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I need to talk to you both about something," he began, his voice low and serious. "Last night I went back to Ambrosi's cabin. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and I had to investigate. Ilya and Tanya exchanged worried glances but remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I found a hidden cellar behind the cabin, Denis said, his voice trembling slightly. It was filled with personal belongings, things that couldn't possibly all belong to Ambrosi. A child's toy, a woman's scarf, a man's watch. Tanya's eyes widened in shock, while Ilya frowned deeply. That's unsettling, Ilya said slowly. Why would he have those things? Denis shook his head. I don't know, but it doesn't sit right with me. I'm worried he might come back, and I don't want to be here if he does. We need to stay vigilant and be ready to move quickly if we have to. The group nodded in agreement, their earlier excitement replaced with a tense wariness. The forest, once full of adventure, now felt like a place of hidden dangers. Determined to understand more about Ambrosi's strange behavior, Denis decided to take another look around the cabin, this time with Ilya by his side. They approached cautiously, making sure not to be seen. The cabin seemed even more dilapidated in the harsh light of day. As they explored, they uncovered several unsettling details. The walls inside were coated with a fine black powder, almost like soot. It clung to their fingers when they touched it, leaving dark smudges. Denis couldn't help but wonder what could have caused it. Look at this, Ilya called out, pointing to a corner of the cabin. There they found a stash of food supplies, vegetables, bread, meat, all poorly preserved and rotting. The smell was rancid, and flies buzzed around the decaying items. Why would he keep spoiled food like this? Ilya asked, perplexed. Denis shook his head, his unease growing. I don't know. None of this makes sense. It's like he's living in some kind of twisted reality. They continued their search, finding more oddities: a pile of worn-out clothes that didn't seem to fit Ambrosi's frame, a stack of old, yellowed photographs of people they didn't recognize, and a crude, hand-drawn map with locations marked in what looked like a child's handwriting. This place is a nightmare, Denis muttered. There's something deeply wrong here. Returning to the camp, they shared their findings with Tanya, who listened with growing horror. What do we do now? She asked, her voice trembling. We leave, Denis said firmly. We gather our things and get as far away from here as possible. Whatever Ambrosi is hiding, it's not something we want to be involved with. With a renewed sense of urgency, the group packed up their camp and prepared to continue their journey. The mood was somber, and the air seemed thicker with the weight of their discovery. They moved quickly, each step taking them further from Ambrosi's cabin and the unsettling mysteries it held. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Denis couldn't help but glance back one last time, hoping that they had left the worst behind them. But a nagging feeling told him that their encounter with Ambrosi was just the beginning of something far more sinister. As the group moved deeper into the forest, Denis's mind continued to whirl with thoughts of Ambrosi's unsettling homestead. He couldn't shake the image of the rotting food and the strange personal belongings. The feeling of unease only grew as they trudged along the forest path. During one of their breaks, Denis decided to explore the surrounding area a bit more. He needed to clear his head and hopefully find some answers to the nagging questions that plagued him. As he walked through the dense underbrush, he stumbled upon a small clearing. Scattered across the ground were a few objects that immediately caught his attention. First, there were several large potato tubers. They looked freshly dug up, but there was no sign of a garden or field nearby where they might have come from. The oddity of their presence here, in the middle of the forest, made Denis's skin crawl. He picked one up, examining it closely. It was dirty and covered in small roots, as if it had been hastily pulled from the earth. Nearby, something else caught his eye: a pair of mismatched boots. One was a sturdy hiking boot, the kind worn by serious trekkers. The other was an old, worn-out work boot, the leather cracked and peeling. Denis felt a shiver run down his spine as he considered the implications. How did these items get here? Who did they belong to? The combination of these mysterious discoveries, the potatoes and the mismatched boots, heightened Denis's sense of dread. He quickly returned to the group, his mind racing with thoughts of Ambrosi and the strange items he had found. Back at the camp, Denis found Tanya sitting by the fire, staring into the flames with a troubled expression. Ilya was nowhere to be seen. Denis felt his heart rate quicken as he approached Tanya. "Where's Ilya?" he asked, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. Tanya looked up, worry etched on her face. "He went to gather more firewood a while ago. He should have been back by now." Dennis's sense of responsibility kicked into high gear. He couldn't afford to let anything happen to his friends. Taking a deep breath, he made a decision. "I'm going to look for him," Denis said firmly. "Stay here and keep the fire going. If we're not back in an hour, pack up and be ready to move." Tanya nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Be careful, Denis." Denis grabbed his flashlight and headed into the forest, calling Ilya's name as he went. The trees loomed tall and dark around him, their branches swaying ominously in the breeze. The forest, once a place of adventure and exploration, now felt like a sinister labyrinth. As he pushed further into the woods, Denis's mind raced with thoughts of Ambrosi and the strange items he had found. Was there a connection? He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something malevolent was lurking just out of sight. "Ilya," he shouted again, his voice echoing through the trees. There was no response, only the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Denis's determination only grew. He wouldn't leave his friend behind. As he moved deeper into the forest, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, he resolved to find Ilya and uncover the truth behind the eerie events that had plagued their journey. With each step, Denis felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had led his friends into this situation, and now it was up to him to get them out safely. No matter what lay ahead, he was ready to face it head on. Denis's mind was a whirlwind of worry and determination as he prepared to venture into the forest in search of Ilya. The unease he had felt since their encounter with Ambrosi now weighed heavily on his shoulders. The mysterious discoveries, the fresh potatoes and mismatched boots, had only heightened his sense of dread. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, seemed to echo with hidden dangers. As he fastened his backpack and checked his flashlight, Denis couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. His friend was out there, possibly in danger, and it was up to him to find him. He glanced at Tanya, who was huddled by the fire, her face pale and worried. "Tanya, I need you to listen to me carefully," Denis said, his voice steady but urgent. "I'm going to look for Ilya. Stay here by the fire and keep it going. It will help me find my way back." Tanya nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Denis, be careful. What if something happens to you too?" Denis forced a reassuring smile, though his heart was pounding. "I'll be fine. Just stay here and be ready to pack up if we need to leave quickly. If I'm not back in an hour, you need to take the essentials and head back to the trail we came from. Do you remember the way?" Tanya nodded again, swallowing hard. "Yes, I remember. But what if something happens and you don't come back?" Denis took a deep breath, hating the fear in her voice. "If I don't come back, you head to the nearest settlement and get help. Don't try to find me on your own. Understand?" Tanya hesitated, then nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I understand. Please just come back." Denis crouched down beside Tanya, looking her in the eyes. "Listen carefully. If you hear anything strange, stay close to the fire and make noise to scare off any animals. Don't wander off and keep your phone handy in case you need to call for help. Remember, the fire is your best protection out here." Tanya took a deep breath, nodding. "Okay, I'll keep the fire going and stay here. Just please, find Ilya and come back safely." Denis gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder before standing up. "I will. Keep your wits about you, and we'll get through this." With one last look at the fire and the worried expression on Tanya's face, Denis turned and headed into the forest. The trees closed in around him, their branches casting long, eerie shadows in the fading light. He called Ilya's name, his voice echoing through the stillness of the woods. Every step felt heavy with the weight of responsibility and fear. As he moved deeper into the forest, Denis couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The thought of Ambrosi and the strange items he had found at the cabin gnawed at him. What was the old man hiding? And where was Ilya? The forest seemed to grow darker, the air thicker with tension. Denis's mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. He had to stay focused, had to find Ilya and get them all to safety. The lives of his friends depended on it. "Ilya," he shouted again, his voice hoarse with worry. There was no answer, only the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Denis pushed on, his determination unwavering. He wouldn't leave his friend behind, no matter what. As he ventured further into the forest, Denis's thoughts turned to Tanya. He had to believe that she would follow his instructions and stay safe. He had to believe that he would find Ilya, and they would all make it out of this forest together. With each step, he steeled himself for whatever lay ahead, ready to face the unknown and bring his friend back safely. As fear and confusion threatened to overwhelm them, Denis stood firm, his determination unwavering. With each step deeper into the forest, he felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. There was no room for doubt or hesitation, not when his friend's life was at stake. "Stay close," he urged the others, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside him. "We'll find Ilya, no matter what." His words were met with nods of agreement, but Denis could see the fear in their eyes. He knew he had to be strong for their sake, to lead them through the darkness with unwavering resolve. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows deepening with every passing moment. Denis's heart raced as he pushed through the underbrush, his senses alert for any sign of danger. And then, suddenly, they found it. A strange creature, like something out of a nightmare, stood before them, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. It held Ilya captive, its twisted form a grotesque mockery of humanity. Denis's blood ran cold as he took in the sight, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. But there was no time for shock or disbelief. With a roar of defiance, Denis sprang into action, his instincts taking over as he fought to free his friend from the creature's grasp. Each movement was fueled by adrenaline, every blow aimed at driving back the nightmare that threatened to consume them all. But the creature was relentless, its strength far greater than anything they had faced before. As Denis struggled to hold it at bay, he could feel the weight of despair pressing down on him. They were outmatched, outnumbered, and alone in the heart of the forest. But Denis refused to give up. With a final, desperate effort, he rallied his friends to his side, their combined strength a beacon of hope in the darkness. Together they fought back against the horrors that lurked in the shadows, their determination unbreakable in the face of overwhelming odds. And though the battle was fierce and the outcome uncertain, Denis knew one thing for certain: they would never stop fighting. For as long as there was breath in their bodies, they would stand together against the darkness, united in their quest for survival. In the face of overwhelming horror, Denis found himself locked in a battle, not just with the creatures that lurked in the shadows, but with his own fear. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to flee, to abandon his friends and save himself. But deep down, he knew that wasn't an option. With trembling hands and a heart pounding in his chest, Denis forced himself to stand his ground. He couldn't afford to give in to panic, not now. Every moment counted, every decision could mean the difference between life and death. As the grotesque creature emerged from the darkness, its twisted form illuminated by the flickering light of their torches, Denis felt a surge of pure terror course through him. He had heard tales of such monsters, whispered rumors of creatures that prowled the depths of the forest, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of facing one head-on. With a primal roar, the creature lunged at Ilya, its claws slashing through the air with deadly precision. Denis reacted instinctively, his muscles tensing as he leaped forward to defend his friend. But even as he swung his weapon with all his might, he knew deep down that it was already too late. The sickening sound of flesh tearing echoed through the night as Denis watched in horror, his heart breaking as he realized the futility of his efforts. No matter how hard he fought, how fiercely he resisted, there was nothing he could do to save his friend from the clutches of the creature that now held him captive. A sense of overwhelming helplessness washed over Denis, threatening to engulf him in despair. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless, utterly unable to protect those he cared about most. But even as despair threatened to consume him, Denis refused to give up. With a steely determination born of desperation, he vowed to fight on, to do whatever it took to survive in this unforgiving world. As the creature launched its assault on Ilya, a surreal glow surrounded it, casting an eerie aura that seemed to warp the very fabric of reality. Dinas couldn't tear his gaze away from the mesmerizing light, which pulsed with an otherworldly energy, infusing the scene with an undeniable sense of mystique. It was as if the creature drew power from the very essence of the forest itself, weaving a tapestry of enchantment that ensnared all who dared to face it. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, Dinas sprinted towards Tanya, his every instinct screaming at him to shield her from harm. He reached her side in a blur of motion, his voice urgent as he urged her to remain calm and silent, emphasizing the importance of staying hidden from the creature's sight. In that moment, he felt a fierce determination to protect her at all costs, to shield her from the horrors that lurked in the darkness. Dinas and Tanya moved as one, their movements silent and deliberate, as they sought refuge in the shadows, mindful of the danger that lurked around every corner. With each step, they treaded softly, their senses on high alert for any sign of the creature's presence. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear coursing through them, driving home the gravity of their situation. In the face of such overwhelming danger, they knew that survival depended on their ability to remain unseen, to outwit their adversary through cunning and stealth. With the mysterious creatures hot on their heels in the dense forest, Dinas and Tanya found themselves cornered, their options dwindling with each passing moment. Faced with the looming threat, they knew they had to take drastic measures to ensure their survival. Desperation fueled their actions as they scrambled to find refuge amidst the chaos. Spotting a shallow ravine ahead, Dinas and Tanya wasted no time in seeking cover, their hearts pounding in their chests as they ducked beneath the overhanging roots and pressed themselves against the earthen walls. It was a makeshift sanctuary, a fragile barrier between them and the encroaching danger. In the dim light of their hiding spot, Dinas huddled close to Tanya, his voice low but determined as he outlined his plan. With unwavering resolve, he proposed a daring scheme to draw the attention of the creatures away from Tanya, providing her with a fleeting chance to escape to safety. Despite the inherent risks, Dinas was prepared to lay his life on the line to ensure her survival, his commitment to her unwavering in the face of impending peril. As the sounds of approaching creatures grew louder, Dinas and Tanya found themselves engulfed in a whirlwind of inner turmoil. Each heartbeat echoed the palpable fear coursing through their veins as they braced themselves for the inevitable confrontation. The uncertainty of their fate hung heavy in the air, amplifying their anxiety with every passing moment. Despite Dinas's valiant proposal to distract the creatures, Tanya's apprehension swelled, her concern for his safety eclipsing any semblance of rationality. With a heavy heart, she rejected his plan, her voice trembling with fear, as she pleaded for them to stand together against the encroaching threat. In her eyes, the prospect of sacrificing Dinas's life for her own survival was simply unthinkable, a price she refused to pay at any cost. Faced with Tanya's steadfast refusal to leave his side, Dinas knew that time was running out. With unwavering determination, he made a split-second decision, his actions fueled by a potent mix of courage and desperation. Braving the unknown, he launched himself into the fray, his sole objective clear: to buy Tanya the precious moments she needed to escape to safety. In that fleeting instant, Dinas became a beacon of hope in the face of impending doom, his selfless sacrifice a testament to the depths of his unwavering devotion. As details surrounding Tanya and her companion's disappearance remain shrouded in mystery, a sense of unease permeates the hearts of their loved ones. The unsettling silence, punctuated only by unanswered questions, casts a shadow of doubt over the once vibrant community. Concerned relatives cling to flickering hope, their anxious pleas echoing through the corridors of uncertainty. With each passing day, the void left by their absence grows deeper, amplifying the urgency of the search efforts. Police teams meticulously comb through dense forests and rugged terrain, their tireless pursuit fueled by a determination to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, the media spotlight casts a glaring scrutiny on the unfolding mystery, its relentless gaze serving as a beacon of hope for those clinging to the faint promise of a resolution. Yet, amid the chaos and confusion, one fact remains irrefutable: Tanya and her companions have vanished without a trace, leaving behind a haunting void that defies explanation. And as the world holds its breath in anticipation, the enigma of their disappearance lingers, a chilling reminder of the fragility of human existence and the relentless march of the unknown. With each passing day, hope wanes, but the search continues unabated, fueled by an unwavering determination to unravel the secrets hidden within the shadows. And as the final chapter draws to a close, the fate of Tanya and her companions remains a haunting enigma, forever etched in the annals of unresolved mysteries.